Good evening and welcome. The time is 6 o'clock and I'd like to call to order the November 13th, 2019 Keizer Planning Commission. City Recorder Debbie has noted the attendance. Approval of the minutes. So our first order of business is to consider the approval of the minutes for the October 9th, 2019 minutes sent to the commission on November 7th. Is there any motion on the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion for approval.
Yes.
Okay. I have a motion by Commissioner Whalen and a second by Commissioner Keizer to approve the minutes as presented. Any discussion on the minutes? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Debbie. Our next order of business is the appearance of interested citizens. This is the time made available for those who wish to speak on an issue that's not on the agenda. Do we have anybody? It doesn't look like we have anybody as appearance of interested citizens.
Interested citizen.
Interested citizen. Thank you. Okay. So we'll move on to the public hearing on the amendment to the Keizer Development Code text amendment case number 2019-22 to consider proposed revisions to the Keizer Development Code to amend section 2.403 shared housing facilities. I will open the public hearing at 6:02 and turn it over to staff. I would ask commissioners to write down any of your questions and please hold until after the conclusion of the staff report and after the public testimony. Mr. Brown, Mr. Witham, Mr. Johnson.
All right, thank you. So tonight we have a public hearing on section 2.403 of the Keizer Development Code, which is our shared housing facilities. This is where we regulate accessory dwelling units. We'll call them ADUs from here on out. For those of you that have been with us on the commission for, 4 months, this is what, the 7th time we've been back with this section for you guys to consider. No, not really. I think this is literally the 3rd time in the last year, however. So we're coming with a pretty straightforward proposal. House Bill 2001, which we've talked a lot about on the surface, and there's all these different changes that are coming into play. One of the provisions that was in House Bill 2001 from the July session was a definition of what a reasonable local regulation is and is not specific to ADUs. And specifically, the bill makes it so that local governments cannot require additional parking for ADUs, nor can we require any kind of owner occupancy requirements for either the ADU or the primary dwelling on a lot. So when we were last before the commission on this issue, those were actually two things that had quite a bit of discussion on, and with lots of reason and input given and taken, we decided to kind of regulate those things. Well, apparently the state says no, we can't. So primarily, the amendment is to eliminate those provisions or modify those provisions to be in compliance with the state law. At the same time, as a staff, we've been processing ADU permits, and I think I put in the staff report, we've actually done 11 in the last 2 years. 6 of those have been in 2019. And we continually get questions at our counter from developers, from property owners about what their options are, what exactly the standards mean. And one of the most recent issues that we had, and I don't know that I'll call it an issue other than it was a concern to us based on what the intent of an ADU is we had a property owner that came in and essentially built a duplex and called it an ADU. And for our development code doesn't really differentiate, the building code really doesn't differentiate between an attached ADU and a duplex. And we didn't have anything in our code to differentiate how many square feet could be devoted to one use or the other. So the other substantive change to the language that we're proposing tonight is a 40% limitation of the overall dwelling space to be devoted to an ADU in that attached ADU scenario. In addition, we put some language in there that limits it to one garage for the structure. So that was kind of our attempt to not have someone kind of skirt the provisions surrounding duplex development And, you know, there's some things with SDC collections and rates. We charge a different rate for an ADU. We charge an ADU as if it was an apartment. A duplex is basically like a single family times two. We also limit duplexes to corner lots. Now, we know that we're gonna have new discussions in another year and a half because of House Bill 2001, and once we get some guidance out there, we'll be changing some things. But we felt it was appropriate at this time, since we're opening the section again, to go ahead and propose something that would create some definition for those attached ADUs. Trying to think, that's really all it is. It's, like I said, it's a real straightforward proposal. Just as an interesting little point, I had literally 5 different people talk to me about ADUs on Tuesday. And one of them is here, and I think he's going to testify, which is awesome. But so there is continual interest in our community of what the rules should and shouldn't be, and can and can't be. So with that, I would entertain any questions that you have on the language.
Mr. Brown.
Just a couple of points in that the question was asked earlier, why aren't we just waiting until we have to do this stuff again with the rest of the House bill that we're going to have to readdress? The House bill actually, the provisions for ADUs became effective immediately. And so we are actually a little slow on getting these changes into our code, but the reality is, you know, the statutory requirements would trump anything that was in our local code anyway. But so this is not, we're not doing this just for fun because we've missed ADUs. This is catching us up to be current with the current statutory requirements. So just wanted to add that in as well.
Mr. Johnson.
Well, never wanting to pass up an opportunity to talk. Staff, Nate and Shane and I talked about this in depth sometime last week or the week before with regard to the attached ADU and how to exactly state, you know, we don't really want a duplex, but it is a policy question for you folks. So in the first page there where it says the area requirements under C, that 40%, that's totally up to you. We kicked around some different percentages. That's not set in concrete at all, so you can decide what that should be. All of us felt as a policy matter, accessory means accessory, which usually means smaller. And so at what point should that be? Should it be 30%, 35, 40%, 45? But we all felt generally that it should be less than 50% to some degree. But again, that's a policy question for you folks to decide. The other thing that I was just chatting with Shane about that I didn't think of until just now is on detached ADUs. Quite some time ago, well, I don't know how many times we talked, maybe it was the year and a half, maybe it was the first of the 3 meetings, but a few years ago, maybe it was just a year and a half ago, it used to be detached ADUs were 25% of the main house or 750 square feet. And the thought was calculating that 25% based on what was sort of difficult. And if we're going to encourage this, why don't we just make it 750 square feet and forget the 25%? But there was really no, and Shane reminds me, at the time, the question was raised on attached ADUs, should we have that same square footage rather than a percentage? And so it was addressed at that time, and the thought was not to have a limitation on it. So, and I don't know if Nate wants to weigh in because I'm catching him off guard too. It just occurred to me is whether or not that might be an option to consider a square foot rather than a percentage. I think the thought on that was if you have a really large house, what's the problem with having an ADU that's over 750 or whatever? Yeah. And I think that was the logic of not going that direction. But that's something that you'd throw in the mix too.
There's also another factor in that Salem also limits the size of their ADUs to a percentage. they express it differently, and we kicked around how to express it. They say that an ADU can only be 75% of the floor area of the main structure. That equates to, in the way that we would like to tell people, is 42.9% can be in an ADU versus
Out of the 100.
Out of 100%.
Of the,
Yeah, so we felt that 40% was fairly close to the same standard that Salem has. And, that's why, to be consistent with our neighboring jurisdiction, when we don't really have a reason to be different from them, I think is a benefit to people, developers, and property owners. But
And the one thing I would add, in your packets, I did include a copy of the Salem Revised Code that regulates ADUs, as I also included the state model code that was put out by DLCD. And Salem pretty much followed the state model code. One of the reasons we have a different number, frankly, is we were ahead of the curve on ADUs. I had cities around the state calling me when the ADU law went into effect with, what bill was that, 2003 or whatever it was, Shannon?
the first one, you mean?
Yeah, the first one a few years ago, because we'd been allowing shared housing facilities and ADUs since 1998. We just didn't see a lot of them built because the market didn't support it. And so we had already rolled our standard way back and been creative to say, hey, we're going to allow 750 straight across the board. We don't care how big the house is. We're just saying 750. It's a reasonable size, and that was what was selected at that time. So when the model code came out, they recommend in that language, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it, but the simplistic way to look at it is they recommend that we allow maybe 800 to 900 square foot, they bracket it, and a 75% cap. So and again, this is obviously our staff recommended proposal to you. There are definitely policy implications with a size limitation. We currently don't have one for attached ADUs. We're proposing one to address this specific example that we've had come up a few times, where if we're building a duplex, that's no longer a primary home and an accessory home. That's just two families living equally, and that doesn't seem like the spirit of what an accessory dwelling should be. But exactly what those numbers are, absolutely, that would be up for consideration for you all to look at and determine what's appropriate. The one piece I will say, and I would stand by, is if I've had a lot of conversations with developers and builders over the past few years, and most of them have indicated that, oh, that's kind of nice that you don't have the percentage cap, because with a smaller home, even at 75%, it can affect what can be built. But not allowing the maximum of 900 is, of course, that's the trade-off, is we're at 750, not up to the 900. So, there is a balance to be had there. So I would just say that is really the reason it's there, is we wrote our stuff first before the states came out. And when we looked at the last time, we actually talked a little bit about should we change it. And at that point, staff had not received a ton of applications or input given that said, oh, this is a huge barrier to developing ADUs. So that's kind of why the numbers line up the way they were. And we did not want to put 42.9% in the development code. And I still do not want to put that kind of a number in the development code. That's really hard math for Shane. So, thank you.
Commissioner Whalen.
Matt, I know you wanted to limit questions, but I have one before we move to the rest of the public hearing. That is, Nate, did I understand you to say that Salem's code is a percentage of the main floor? So if you have a two-story house and it's 2,000 feet, it's only the first, 1,000 on the main floor counts?
No, I think it's the total dwelling,
Okay.
not just the.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify, because I thought I heard
floor.
you say percentage of the main floor, maybe it was main structure.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
So thank you for clarifying. I meant hold questions until after the staff report. Thank you. Commissioner Hosler.
Yes, I have a number of questions about this particular subject. The first one was in in the paperwork, it said the whole floor could be an ADU, even though it's over 750 square feet?
Yeah, that is language that's in there. That language is recommended by the state model code, and that's primarily what most jurisdictions have adopted. That's pretty anecdotal. I can't give you a quantified number of jurisdictions that have. I think the concept there is that if you have a 2-story structure, or maybe it's a house with a basement that has a walkout, practically from just construction standards, if you're converting an entire floor, they generally say, yes, that's allowable regardless of what the square footage breaks are. So that is the language that's in there.
I don't want to step on any toes. And so if there's an agenda that we need to go down, then these questions can be asked later, or shall I do it now?
I think we've already started asking a few questions unless,
I think our staff report.
No, that was it.
Our staff report is concluded.
okay. And I did state, I asked the commissioners to hold questions until after the staff report and the public comments, but I meant to say after staff report. I got a little ahead of myself, so I apologize. Anything else?
Yes. The report says that it's not, the ADUs are not part of the accessory dwelling units are not included in the density calculation?
That's correct.
Can you give the pros and cons of each one? Why not?
So basically, again, state guidance is kind of driving, well, okay, from a simple way, I think the reason the state's recommending that and that we have had that in there is when you have an established neighborhood, when I process, say, a subdivision that comes in and it's a greenfield development or it's a redevelopment of a few acres, we have a minimum and maximum density for different zoning designations. So generally, when ADUs are established later or after the fact, a lot of our subdivisions in today's day and age, because of basically the cost of land and the cost of development, they get developed, especially in our low density residential designations, pretty darn close to the max densities allowed. So it could become a situation if you go and develop a subdivision of 5,000 square foot lots, it's figured out right where you can throw duplexes on the corners, and do all of this, you may hit that 8 units max an acre. Or it may be, and we generally see more like 6 units an acre. That's been pretty consistent over the last 3 to 5 years. But the concern there is that if one neighbor comes in a subdivision and they want to add an ADU, if it's subject to overall density calcs, then we as a staff and they as a homeowner or a property owner may be precluded from being able to develop an ADU because they would exceed a maximum density provision. And conversely, in order to utilize the land efficiently within the urban area, we would want to not have a alleged possibility of an ADU to be used to up what could possibly be built on a property to justify larger lot sizes and basically not achieving those minimum residential densities that are identified in our comp plan of the 4 units an acre. So that's kind of why they're not part of the minimum or maximum density calculations.
Thank you.
You have other questions?
You still got more?
I am finished.
Okay,
Oh, okay.
please, Commissioner Keizer.
Thank you. I'm trying to understand why we want to restrict the size of the ADU at all if we have other setback restrictions and other restrictions that would govern that. Why do we even bother restricting the sizes?
Commissioner Keizer, are you speaking to detached ADUs or is it all kinds?
Oh,
Okay. So I think, again, that would be just absolutely a policy kind of question. I mean, historically, we've capped it at the 750 for detached. We're not proposing any changes to that. And again, the reasoning from a staff level of saying, hey, a 40%, 60% split for an attached ADU is because in my opinion, a duplex is it is a different built housing, whatever, it's a different kind of housing stock than an accessory dwelling unit. And when we're looking at it holistically and saying, okay, accessory dwelling units require 0 parking. We can't require any parking for them. And it's not gonna have different utilities. It's gonna be served with the same utilities. It's gonna be shared. It's gonna be secondary to and somewhat subservient to a primary dwelling. To me, if the 2 dwellings are absolutely equal, that's not accessory to, it's equal to. And so I think that when you're looking at the housing stock that's provided, generally, at some point, the level of size governs how many bedrooms you can have in it, how large a family that's gonna live in it, whether or not it's gonna be for a single person or a couple or a family or whatever. And so I think frankly, those are the reasons to regulate the size, is the impacts on the overall system, things like parking, all of that. But you're right, setbacks are gonna regulate building massing for sure.
And the reason why I was thinking of this is I just happened to be in southeast Keizer and driving around, and there's an awful lot of rather large lots with rather small houses. And not that this would necessarily happen, but I suppose somebody could decide, well, I want to do an ADU, but I'm going to build me a 2,200 square foot ADU that I'm going to live in, and I'm going to rent out the primary structure as my rental. The reverse of what we've been talking about.
So in that case, what we would simply tell somebody that wanted to do that is you would designate the larger home as your main structure
Okay,
and designate the other one as your accessory.
okay.
We don't care who lives in what.
Gotcha.
We are saying, though, that there are different categories as to parking. Parking is not required for an accessory. It is for the main home.
Okay,
There
so they
are,
would designate, they come in to get a building permit. They would have to designate at that time the new larger structure as the primary.
right.
Yeah, the issue with that, I mean.
Then
I'm
they would
just-
have to do the parking and stuff.
They would have to do that.
Right.
They would have to do the parking and stuff.
Yeah, or they'd have to utilize the existing parking
use
for the
it,
main
yeah.
house. But, I mean, honestly, the more practical issue that's gonna happen with that is there isn't very many houses that are 750 square feet that are primary dwellings on lots, even in southeast Keizer.
Sure.
I mean, I lived there isn't. And so, I mean, I think that is, practically that could become an issue. So, I mean, maybe a straight percentage with no cap is a better way to go. That really is a policy kind of
But
question.
under that policy, though, if that is really the case, with our development requirements for 0 lot line development and attached dwellings, all of that, we would recommend that just simply partition it then.
Yeah.
And if you've got that kind of space available and you don't want to have to deal with those limitations, there are other avenues available for you to accomplish what you want to do.
Okay, well, and I guess that was my concern, is that
Yeah.
I was seeing some rather large pieces with some small houses.
Sure.
I never even thought about one. And there's probably some of them that are not 750 square feet.
Yeah.
And we talk about redevelopment and talking about denser building. I was thinking that
Sure.
area, but I wasn't even considering the idea of partitioning rather
Yeah.
than.
Yeah, and I do think from a land supply and an overall planning through, we just went through our housing needs analysis and buildable lands inventory. I think that, I absolutely agree with you. And there's definitely, that's something we all should be mindful of. But I would agree with Nate. I think that the reality is we would want to see partitioning and division of that land. For one thing, it's going to be more practical for those individual property owners to actually finance the builds. Just because essentially you build an ADU and you're essentially, from a appraisal point of view, it's still one house with just more square footage. Because it's not on its own lot, it's not on its own parcel. And so I think practically, probably for financing, for mortgaging those things, if you have a lot that's large enough, the partition is the better way to go. And again, ADUs, what the attempt has been from both the state level and our local level, because I think we've done a really good job with trying to kind of get outside the box and get ahead of it a bit. But we're trying to look and capture a bit of a housing stock that is underserved piece that's not there. So it's giving another option for the lots that maybe aren't big enough to be divided, and it doesn't make sense to partition, but we still could do something. So,
Yeah, well, I'm looking for the most flexibility
sure.
to the landowner to be able to use their property the way they want to use it. Okay, but there's more than one way to get there.
Sure.
Okay.
And my concern is to a point. What we're talking about here is an accessory dwelling unit, which by definition is intended to be dependent upon the main use. And when people want to be creative, obviously we want to support them. We want them to be able to develop in a variety of different ways. But there's also some responsibilities when you start going into an area that has large lots, small homes. Typically, or many times anyway, not typically, but many times they don't have street frontage improvements. They don't have those kinds of general community connections that an existing development pattern would have. The accessory dwelling unit is intended to be able to create an additional carve out to allow a little more different kinds of housing stock to supply the range of needs. The missing middle is constantly being brought up. So the intent is to find ways to facilitate that, not find ways to get around providing community infrastructure development and community structure.
Commissioner Whalen?
Thank you. For staff, on your staff report, down at the bottom, we have proposed text amendments.
Yep.
The last one, limiting the size of the ADU to 40% of the overall, and allow only one attached garage.
Yes.
Okay, so if you have a house that has a single-car garage, and there's a number of those in particularly, 1950s and 60s neighborhoods.
Sure.
That can still support an ADU, could they build attached, make their single-car garage into a double garage?
Sure.
Without, they still have the access way for the driveway and all that stuff.
In Shane's regulatory mind, absolutely. And that may be something that some wordsmithing needs to happen to clarify that. But what the intent there, and again, we had it's a real world example. I could give you the address, you can go drive by and look at it, and you go, oh, it's a duplex, Shane. I was like, no, that's not. That's an attached ADU that was built brand new. But it literally has two single-car garages. They are not connected. They are completely separated from one another. So if you want to have a double-car garage or a triple-car garage or a four-bay garage, you absolutely could do that. But what I would say is that from a structural building permit review, I will not allow you to parcelize out those garages to make them two separate entities.
Okay.
And the idea there is to have it continue to appear and look like a single-family dwelling from the street, which is also why before, when we looked at attached, we said, hey, the front door either needs to be a shared front entry with a vestibule, or it needs to be a front door on opposite building frontages, so you don't have multiple front door entries coming out onto the main street. So that's the intent of it, Commissioner Whalen.
Yeah, because, following up, on Mark's idea of trying to make this most adaptable and flexible for all parties, as long as we meet the setbacks and everything else that needs to follow, if you could you could increase your garage size or whatever, as long as you meet all the other requirements, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then we were talking about the development charges, water, sewer.
Yes.
And in the model code, I don't know here that they're saying that you can't have those.
No, they recommend not to.
Well,
And they've recommended.
accessory dwellings are an economical way to provide additional, but at the same time, there's a cost for that infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you had single water meters like we have on probably any duplex that's been
Yes.
put up in Keizer after 1980 or whatever that date was.
Yep.
A duplex has a single meter. But if you have a detached, and assuming you can have the proper water flow off a 1/2 or 3/4 inch meter, which you can probably get, you're not gonna have another meter charge.
Right.
You're just gonna have the plumbing from the meter to the new ADU, which
Correct.
that's a developer cost, builder cost, whatever that is, okay? Same thing for sewer?
That's correct. I've had a few folks that have, and basically right now, so sewer, if there's, it's Public Works policy that it's 1 meter per lot. So it's based on lot division. So that is a shared water meter. There's been a few people that have looked and said, well, am I gonna have to upgrade my meter? So if I have a 5/8, am I gonna have to go 3/4 or 1 inch or whatever? And if they did have to upgrade, they would have to pay the difference between that and the SDC fees. We haven't had anybody have to do that in the 11 that we've processed. They've all just been able to work with their existing water service. I had one, I don't think they ended up doing it, but they wanted to serve with a different sewer drop just because of where the sewer service went to their existing home. And so we sent them to City of Salem because with the kind of after the fact, Salem permits those taps. And I have talked to them and it's very much case by case. They say, well, that might be possible, but I have yet to see somebody actually do that. Okay. But I've had a couple people ask and then they never came back to do it. So I think it's probably too expensive. Or Salem just says, no, you can't do it. But so the SDCs, and I didn't make that very clear, but the SDCs we collect on ADUs currently are for parks and transportation, and we collect those at the apartment rate, which is like 2/3 of what a house is or something like that, or 60% maybe.
But
of what
there
a house
are
costs.
SDCs collected for ADUs,
Currently, yes.
but they're for parks and transportation, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay,
And they're at the reduced rate of an apartment
okay,
rate.
that's, okay.
And a reduced rate, I just did want to point out, the discussion on SDCs brings to fore the fact that our SDC structure here is like 25% of what it is in Salem, for example. In many other jurisdictions, the SDC is a huge hurdle. Ours is still, it's still money, it's still expensive, yes, but it is not the hurdle and the major obstacle that it is in other jurisdictions. Now, the city of Keizer at some point is going to have to update its system development charge structure. And we're going to have to go through that entire process of evaluating what our infrastructure needs are for growth. We're working through that with transportation, for example. So that's another reason, until we get to the point of reevaluating our SDC structure, we are very reluctant to say, well, let's just waive this category or let's just waive that category, because it was all built on a specific kind of process based on trips, based on flows, based on all of that stuff. We may want to look at it in the future, but for now, the structure has been established. And without revising the structure, we're saying a strong recommendation is to go forward as it is currently structured until that structure is changed.
Okay. And I'm fine with that, but I appreciate the clarification. I didn't know, when we talk SDCs, you know, it's usually a bigger package than just parks and transportation.
Yeah.
Okay. Given that we are looking at, you know, meeting population and growth and this whole thing with the UGB and all, but somewhat related to that, why are accessory dwellings not included in the density calculation? I mean, it's probably not going to make 1/100% difference, but the potential is there that it could benefit us in terms of meeting
Well,
the development growth needs.
let me take a stab at what Shane's already outlined as far as what happens with an ADU is there after the fact, after the subdivision is constructed, after everything is established. And then you have the potential for these additional ADUs to come on board. Now, imagine, if you will, that we have an established subdivision. It's fairly recent, it's fairly new, but I think, as Shane pointed out, typically what we see is maybe 6 dwelling units per acre. there's still an opportunity for maybe one or two more ADUs, if they were calculated in that threshold, that could come in. So you would honestly expect the city then, if we said they are part of the density, to keep track of who has an ADU and first come, first serve. And I'm sorry, your neighbor down the street, 6 houses, did an ADU and they took up your allotment for that entire subdivision, for that ADU. I'm not sure that there wouldn't be some sort of legal challenge that would say, wait a minute, how come they had the right? There was no difference in their house to our house, but you're saying they could and I can't. It puts the city in a very untenable position. And for now, until ADUs become a much more significant impact or use, then we're saying those are bridges that we really are not prepared to cross at this point.
Thank you, that's all I have.
Commissioner Grants?
Yeah, so the model code specifically has a provision that states that accessory dwellings are not counted in the density calculation. Does the KDC have a code provision like that? That specifically states that?
I know that we do for our RCOD zone, the one that we just passed. We do not apply it. I don't know that because our density provision in the RS zone kicks in during subdivision review. That's what it kicks in during.
Right.
Multifamily, it would kick in during any multifamily project. So a new apartment comes in, well, I do a density calc.
Right.
I don't know that we have, I'm trying to remember, I didn't add anything to it this time on that. Let me look.
We'll add it.
But we can definitely add that. I mean, that's, like I said, the RCOD zone, that did specifically add that because we're allowing up to 2 ADUs in that area.
Right.
So,
My fear is that that could be justifiable reason for an appeal for a subdivision that comes in, or even a partition that comes in near the maximum density, and that could be appealable, as you've got to take into account all the potential ADUs that could be there. That scares me.
yeah, and I mean, obviously that's not the intent.
Right.
We don't do that from a practical matter, and our code doesn't actually get you there from a actual review side of things, but your point is well taken. I mean, and that's something that, I guess.
Yeah, we'll add that unless there's objection. We'll just add that.
That's a
A
very
good catch.
valuable addition.
Okay. So unless there's anything else, I'd say now is the time where I'd like to invite members of the public to provide public testimony on the matter before the Planning Commission. I would ask that members of the public providing testimony please state clearly for the record your name, first name and last name, and your address of residency. And this exhaustive list includes one individual, Lamont Hochstetler. Is that correct? Yes. All right, Mr. Hochstetler, please come forward. I'd like to thank you for coming before the Planning Commission and look forward to hearing from your testimony.
My name's Lamont Hostetler. Address is 3400 Brush College Road in West Salem. And I'm glad I got here early because I wanted to get a good seat. I appreciate Shane for kind of inviting me. I was one of the people that came in and talked to him about a potential project, and he informed me about this, and I am glad to be here. This is good, and I realize more and more how we need to step up and be part of the process if we have something to say. So my testimony is very simple. I am a builder, and I'm in the process of building an ADU right now in West Salem. I also have another client that wants to build an ADU in Keizer. We're under the beginning stages of drawing some plans for that. And my main concern in Salem, it was no problem for me to build what I wanted to. I stayed under the 900 square feet, and I was able to get a 2-bedroom ADU, and it's going to work out, really well. The problem that I have with the Keizer one is that with the 750 square feet, it makes it very hard to get an extra bedroom. It is pretty much a one-bedroom structure. If you do a second bedroom, it's very small, or you really have to crowd everything else to come close to making it work. And my feeling on it is that if we're trying to add housing for maybe people with a couple kids or something like that, or like I've been involved with a church that is buying some housing and redoing it so that they can put unwed mothers in because they just can't afford anything else. And so that's a little bit where my heart is on this, trying to provide that extra bedroom in this facility, in this structure that would accommodate somebody like that. One bedroom is going to be hard, to get to that, to meet that need and maybe many other needs. So my proposal would be that in the attached or the detached structure, that you, instead of 750, that you would be, another 100 square feet would be great. Even 75 square feet would be enough to make that work. So I would propose that you add something to that and raise that just to that minimum so that you could get a 2-bedroom and you could maybe meet a lot of other needs of people that, that really need that more affordable housing. So thank you for your time.
All right, well, thank you for coming and speaking with us this evening. Not a lot of other folks waiting in the gallery there, so I'd like to open up the floor back to the commission for any additional discussion for what we've heard from the planning staff and legal department and from our public testimony. Commissioner Keller.
I think you, gentleman raised a good point. I even thought about it. My daughter lives in a 900 square foot house with a 2-bedroom, 4 people. I don't stay there because it's 900 square feet, 2-bedroom with 4 people. But I could see where it'd be very difficult to have a 2-bedroom place at 750 square feet, unless you're into real tiny houses, and that's okay too. The state recommendation's 900 square feet in the model code. And I think we ought to consider maybe that should be our number, unless staff has a real good reason why we should not raise it.
I know when we chatted at the counter, I said, if it were to be upped, I think that, our justification of not having a percentage cap is based on, hey, some of those properties are going to benefit with a little larger structure, but the overall kind of is a wash. My opinion would be that, the other thing I will add, one of the folks I talked to has a project in Keizer right now. They've not applied for building permits yet because they are doing some other work, but they are intending to apply to build an ADU. And they actually have a pretty darn small house in a part of town where if a percentage cap was added, it would cut them out from being able to do a project up to the 750. So I think that would be from my perspective, that would be the question. I think that absolutely adding enough square footage to get that second bedroom, I get that. And that's generally why I would say, that's kind of why the model code in the city of Salem and a bunch of other jurisdictions said, yes, but we're still gonna have a percentage of the main house, so it's kind of secondary. I think that would be my only real concern would be, do we end up with a scenario where you've got, instead of that duplex of 2 equal houses, now you've got 2 just houses that are 2,000 square foot houses on a lot in a residential single family neighborhood with no additional parking. So that'd be my only concern, but I think Nate wanted to say something.
Go ahead.
So our concern, and always has been, is preserving neighborhood character. And yes, we do know that we are part of the state of Oregon and that there is a lot of stuff going on legislatively, et cetera, but we are still Keizer. And the reason we discussed that ownership requirement was pretty much exactly that same kind of concern, is we want to preserve our sense of neighborhoods and we want to promote home ownership. We want to take people that are invested in their neighborhoods. And so our concern is one way or the other. Now, I don't think we really care if we have a percentage of like Salem, a percentage of the main structure, such as the 42.9, whatever, or a size cap or something. Our concern is still to make sure that we are paying attention to what the community fabric is, what the neighborhood fabric is. It's not just single-family homes scattered amongst multifamily. So I think if Planning Commission, for example, wanted to raise that up to the 900 suggested language, I don't think we'd have a problem with that if there was a relationship between the accessory to in the size limitation. If somebody had a small home and they wanted to add an accessory dwelling unit, as I said, they could flip it and build a larger structure and call the other one. They could actually enlarge the existing home. I mean, you start adding on costs and it becomes prohibitive, that sort of thing. We understand that. Our only concern is that we pay attention to the community fabric of existing neighborhoods. And how do we wrestle with that, and how do we ensure that as we incorporate additional density and additional housing types in an existing neighborhood?
The code, the model here says accession shall not exceed 900 square feet or 75% of the main building gross area, whichever is less. Does that get us there?
I think that would get us there.
Mr. Johnson.
Nate pretty much took what I said, I think said it pretty well. I think the main issue is back when we dropped correct me if I'm wrong, but the old standard for detached was 750 square feet or 25%, whichever is less. And we dropped to 25%, not only because it was easier, but we thought it was fair and allow people to build bigger ones. And I think the thought was at 750 square feet, you're not going to have anything that really approaches the size of the primary house very close. I mean, you have some small houses, but you don't get down to 800, 900 square feet. If you go to 900 square feet, do you care if the other house on the lot is also 900 square feet? And I think that's kind of what Nate's getting at. And whether you express it as a 75% of that, of the total, or 40% of the main house, or whatever, however you want to do it, is up to you. Or just go with the increase and not worry about the distinction. The concept being, of course, that in a rare circumstance, you could have, without a percentage limitation, you could have a 900 square foot ADU under what you're discussing now, and an 850 square foot main house. And is that a big deal? And is that likely to happen? I don't know.
Well, you couldn't with, or 75% of the main gross building area.
If you do that, but right now, the way the format of our proposed code doesn't have any percentages, so that's what I think everybody's getting
Right,
at.
and because basically it's 1,200 square foot gross building area to make 900 square feet.
Right.
Or whichever's less, so if it's 1,000 square foot house, it's 75% of that, or not house, gross building area, it's 75% of that, well, 75% of that's 750.
Correct. And the one thing I would add, just, I think it's absolutely a policy type of question for your consideration. It depends on what and where you want to go with the flexibility. As I said, I talked to another developer who's got a project he's planning to do in Keizer. And I told him, I said, you should submit some written testimony then. And he did not submit written testimony and didn't come to testify. But he's an out-of-town guy, so that was why. But he has a property in Keizer, and he's planning on doing an ADU because it's not big enough to divide. But it's a tiny house that's on it right now. So that it's hard because it may get captured that it still could be a problem to add it. I mean, from a staff administrative point of view, I like the idea, hey, detached, you build it this big, this is what it is. That's fine. But that's something that I think just, it is truly a policy kind of question for y'all to consider. I don't, personally, setbacks are the same, design standards are the same, lot coverage still applies to ADUs, so the proximity and the height and the massing of it, I mean, 150 extra square feet is it's basically another bedroom. I mean, that is what you're looking at. So, yeah, I think that either way, we can change the language however you see fit.
Okay. Commissioner Miller.
Thank you. I'm pretty much in favor of just a flat square footage for detached. For attached, maybe to prevent this duplex, maybe that should be a percentage of the main structure. So there is a noticeable difference, even though you still have to meet with the design standards and the aesthetics of the neighborhood and all that stuff. But I think for detached, if you had I'll use 900 feet, you can put together, I think, a nicer property that's probably going to draw a nicer, and I say this because I have investment property. I've also built a number of houses when I was much younger. And I just think you can actually enhance the neighborhood and draw I don't know what the politically correct word is. You'll have a better neighborhood and maintain the integrity of that neighborhood by making more attractive housing. Of course, as you get bigger, you're moving further from affordable housing, which is just this evasive target anyhow. But I think for detached, I think a flat rate, square foot, no percentage of the main structure. But possibly for staff's administration, I'd like your feedback on this. Maybe if it's an attached ADU, maybe a percentage would make it easier from an administrative standpoint. And I see this perplexed look on Jeremy's face.
That's what it says here, 40%.
What? Commissioner Osler, unless you guys have any follow-up to that right now.
I'm not sure administratively it would make a huge deal to us. I'm looking at Shane because he's the one that actually gets the ruler out. But I think if it was either a percentage or a square footage cap, it's just simple math.
Yeah, I'll just say this, because actually there is some, depending on the direction that Planning Commission wants to go, I might ask for some additional direction. I prefer the flat number, just straight up. I think it's really simple for somebody that walks into my counter. I can hand them a flyer and says, this is the limit. So I do prefer the flat number. That's what I recommended in the staff report. I didn't recommend changing the size because I haven't seen a huge issue with the size. As I said, I had 5 people talk to me on Tuesday, which was crazy. One of them came, which I think is great, and I appreciate the testimony that was provided because I think there's some valid points raised. So I think that if Planning Commission wants to up the square footage allowed, I don't have big concerns with it since we're not changing anything else as far as setbacks or any of that goes. And really, Nate is right. From my end, it's not that difficult. I'll use a calculator at my desk and figure out how big it can be. The customer's end, it might be a little less helpful, but they can use a calculator and figure it out too. So, I think it's 601, half a dozen of another in some regard.
All right. Mr. Osler.
Yes, my mind says House Bill, Senate Bill 2001, and we're behind it. And so infill. And so I've never really looked at granny flats, now they're ADUs, as infill. And so now that we can look at them as a business standpoint from when a developer uses them for an extra income. Now for the heights, I think we could question the heights of the accessory dwelling units. not to differ, now we're getting into the weeds, I know, Shane, but not to differ from the main house in the finish work. Okay? So when I hear infill, I think of accessory dwelling units. Okay, and so when I was in school, the instructor said, when you have a party, do two things. Invite the people and have food, and they will come. Okay? And another one is, you're here, I'm here, but who's missing? Because you came this evening, thank you. You brought another aspect to what we're looking at, a different set of eyes, and that's what I was taught. And so I'm not a big fan of the accessory dwelling units not included in the density calculations yet, because I think that looking at the other municipalities in the area that are much bigger, they have the resources and the personnel to do so, but they still have system development fees, okay, to where they can generate some revenue. When somebody says they want another bedroom, that tells me that they're going to rent that out. That's what they tell me. That's what I hear. Okay. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, well, I just want to confirm, we do collect SDCs on the ADUs. So I want to make sure that part is clear. In terms of density calculation, I'll just refer to Nate and Shane. I think it kind of makes sense, not that, I don't know how we would calculate it exactly. And that the model code, I think, calls for not trying to calculate that. I see the point in doing that, but I just think it'd be, as a practical matter, kind of difficult.
So I've got one question, and it's just a point of clarity. On 2.403.1 Charlie, area requirements, square footage of the attached ADU is limited to 40%. The total dwelling square footage, including garage and accessory structure. The attached ADU must contain 300 square feet of floor area, and the primary dwelling must contain at least 600 square feet of the floor area. So I'm not a mathologist, but that's 50%, right? So 300, if you're looking at the numbers, 300 is half of 600. So if it's 1,000 square foot home, am I missing something, or?
Well,
No,
that's the minimum sizes.
Yeah.
So if you had, remember, we're looking at attached now.
Right.
And by the way, it doesn't really state it here, but you could have one that's purely a conversion with no increase in the square footage,
Right.
right? You convert part of it. Or you could have an addition where you increase the total size but it's still attached. So I think what that means, and these guys can correct me here if I'm wrong, is that if you had a 900 square foot house and you weren't adding anything, the main dwelling would have to be 600 square feet, and the rest would have to be 40% of that, which is
Okay.
whatever that is.
Carry it on.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, actually, no.
No,
Remember, it's a split.
It's 40% of the total.
Of the
So-
total.
So,
Right.
again, I had to
Right.
get out my calculator. I wasn't playing on my
Right. So
phone.
it's 40% of,
So in a 900 square foot house, it's like 360 square feet
Okay.
yeah.
So as long as it's at least 300.
Right, and that's an old standard that's always lived in our shared housing facilities back in the day of conversion to shared housing, because that's
Work.
how this, what's that?
I'm sorry.
That's how it originally started out, as you had this cap of saying, hey, one of the dwellings at least has to be 300 square feet, one at least has to be 600 square feet. So,
Okay. That's a little more clear. I was a little fuzzy on the map there. So I guess related to that, the 40% is your recommendation, but it's not set in stone. We can talk about that if there's a feeling one way or another on the commission about that limitation. We can still have that discussion, correct?
yes, and that was, full disclosure, I originally put language in there that was similar to Salem's with the 75%, and it was like, math is hard. It just was, and then there was a lot of questions of 75% of what? 75% of which part of the house?
Right.
So the language that we went with was the closest to that 75% number. And Shannon came up with it and helped, okay, that makes more sense now. So it got wordsmith, which is why part of it's blue and part of it's red. Because that was the attorney's office changing what Shane still feels is a completely simple, I understood it, but when everybody else read it, they were like, no, I don't know what that means, so.
So those two numbers notwithstanding, area requirements do not apply at all to the conversion of an entire level. And I think that was one of the questions that was brought up earlier.
Yep.
But I just want to clarify, if it's a two-story home, then one story could be completely changed over to an attached ADU and it has no impact on the other square footage as presented.
Correct.
All right. Commissioner Grintz.
Thank you. I have a few questions. I'll start with who's red and who's blue?
Shannon's blue.
Shannon's blue, okay.
A political question?
No. So the way I read that same code section, so if somebody has a primary dwelling that's 600 square feet, excluding the garage and accessory structure, and they're not converting an entire level, they cannot have an ADU.
For attached, yeah.
With
you're right.
the 40%
Right.
cap.
Yeah, you'd be
Okay.
right.
The size, I think.
Right. Okay. The next, I do have a concern about a straight maximum without a percentage. The first house I lived in, before the garage was converted, it was 840 square feet. If you throw a 900 square foot accessory dwelling unit on it, it doesn't look like an accessory. And this, nowhere in here does it say that the accessory has to be smaller than the primary.
Right.
So you could conceivably have a primary that's smaller than the accessory.
And I think the thought was at 750 square feet, that's just not very likely to happen. At 850 or 900, maybe it could.
Sure.
And so that was what you were hearing over here. And,
Yeah.
and again, like Shane pointed out, it's purely your folks' call. It's a policy question.
Right. And then delving into policy, if I remember from the housing needs analysis buildable lands inventory, if I got that right, Keizer is short in the low income and high income housing needs. We're not short for middle.
Single family middle.
Okay. So when I think of ADUs, I think of one bedroom, maybe studio type. 750 is a luxury. I see that type of an ADU fitting more of that need for lower income. I don't know that Keizer needs more two-bedroom rentals that are going to go for $1,400 a month. We can all ponder that for a minute. That's all I got.
So it sounds like to me, I think there's a couple concepts we're wrestling with. One is the detached ADU square footage. And then the other is this concept of the language that we're potentially going to add as it relates to the density, right? That this doesn't count towards the density, a statement that suggests that. Is there any other themes that I'm missing here that we want to kind of go over? Any? Okay. So, procedurally, yes. Mr. Keller.
I'd like to make a motion.
Well, I think we need to close the public hearing
We
first.
close the public-
I got my notes. Debbie gave me notes.
Close the public hearing so I can make my motion.
So Seeing or hearing no further comments or questions, I will now close the public hearing at 7:04. Now, Commissioner Keizer.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt the staff report with the following amendment to 2.403.02E from a 750 square foot to read, a detached accessory dwelling shall not exceed 900 square feet of floor area or 75% of the primary dwelling's floor area, whichever is smaller.
900 or 75%?
The state's recommended.
Okay, the model, okay.
The model.
And that's, excuse me, but 75% of the dwelling area, excluding garages.
Dwelling's floor area is what the model says. But I'm flexible and if somebody's got a good discussion, okay.
Okay, so we have a motion from Commissioner Keizer to accept the plan with the change to, I gotta find it here, 2.403.2E to read detached ADU shall be no larger than 900 square feet in total area or 75% of the dwelling area. Is that correct?
Whichever's less.
Or whichever's less. And then, okay, any second on that?
I'll second that.
Okay, we got a second from Commissioner Whalen. Discussion. Do we need to include the language about the density portion in that, or is that just a matter of course?
That's up to the
I didn't
mover.
in my motion specifically,
Okay.
based on staff's recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
So, yeah, go ahead, Shane.
So the one thing I would just want clarification in the motion, and I know we haven't talked at all tonight because we didn't propose any language changes, but we have another section in this development code section on conversions of existing outbuildings. And currently, the square footage cap on a conversion mirrors a detached ADU. And we have language that basically says if you're going to convert, and this would be on page 3 of the text under bullet point, it's now I. So it's 2.40302I number 3. So we limit it to a maximum of 750 square feet because that mirrored what a new detached accessory structure would be. I would like to make sure that I get the clarification from the commission if the intent would be to mirror or match that a new or a conversion would be the same. Does that make sense?
So we would think that the intent would be to have that conversion also mirror the total maximum.
That same language.
Yeah, I would like to amend my motion to reflect that. That would be changed from 750 square feet to the 900.
Or the 75% as well.
Or 70, whichever is less. If that's okay with us.
All second's fine.
Okay, so we have the amendment
Thank you, Shane.
on I3 to include the 900 square feet or 75%, whichever is less. Any additional discussion on this?
I suggest we further amend the motion to include a specific code provision about the accessory dwelling units not being included in density calculations.
And that would be as a friendly amendment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's great.
Okay.
Good thinking.
Okay.
That way we set a clear line.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, so we have the motion, the amendment, and the friendly amendment. I did not draw out a test for all of that.
Staff report as amended.
There you go. Any,
Sorry, point of clarification. So what we are reading that as is the language on the area requirements. That is 2.40301C. That would be changed from that 40%, which is really 42.9%, is 75.
It's 40.
No,
Well, or do we want to change it to the 75%? Do we want to mirror the model code?
no, I actually did not want to.
Oh, okay.
I wanted to leave leave it the way it was.
Okay.
Yeah, that's for the attached.
So it's just, okay.
Detached, attached, different.
Just being clear.
Okay, so I'm going to do my best to try to summarize this so we're all very clear of what the motion is. The motion is to change, well, we're going to, all right, sorry. So for 2.40302, Part E, the detached ADU shall be no larger than 900 square feet or 75% total dwelling unit or less for the total dwelling unit.
Correct.
In I3, the same language, and we are adding via the friendly amendment, the language regarding the not including ADUs as a function of the density calculation.
Yes.
And we're leaving C alone. Any further discussion on this before I,
Let's vote.
okay,
Call for the question.
Question.
Oops.
I have a question.
Go. I
Okay,
missed that.
the planner in me, okay, is not gonna let this go in terms of, could we in the future revisit ADUs as part of,
I'll guarantee you we are going to.
okay.
Yeah,
all right.
it's our third time in a year and a half.
Oh,
The
really?
fourth one's coming right after 2021 or 2001's, the
2022.
next phase of its,
In all
Mapped out.
seriousness, Commissioner, all of this is subject to further review as we go through, as we live with it, as the market changes, as the impacts become manifest. All of this is going to be under scrutiny and monitoring from, it's what we do. And that's just a fact of life. That's why we've done this already 3 times this year. So nothing that is here is carved in stone from the tablets on wherever. It's, this is our code that we live with, and we will monitor it.
And the one thing I might add, Commissioner Hostler, I think, I mean, if I'm understanding your concern right, it's that, hey, if we're providing this housing stock through ADUs, we should be looking at it and quantifying it and using it as part of our projection to accommodate population growth. And I agree with you. We've actually had quite a bit of talk with our DLCD reps, our state folks that kind of govern the housing needs analysis and buildable lands inventories. And one of the things they've talked about is the fact that when we are projecting out new housing products or new growth where we don't have an actual baseline to kind of truth what's able to be accomplished, the one thing the state is very keen to is they don't want to have cities coming in and saying, oh, we have this huge projected need. Oh, we don't have to do anything. We don't have to change anything. It'll just all be accommodated through ADUs. They want an actual record to show what kind of production you're doing. And one of the pieces with the House bill that was passed is we have to have a house productions strategy, is I think what it's called, or housing production strategy that is going to be having to get adopted in the next year. So I do think the one piece is, I think ultimately we will most likely revisit this as a function of an amendment to or an updating of our housing needs analysis and buildable lands inventory based on actual permit history. So, I mean, I absolutely hear where you're coming from, and if I understand your concern right, I'm right on the same page with you, because we've had these discussions with the state already as to saying, hey, we can accommodate some, but not all through this, so how do we plan for our growth?
Well,
So,
Yes.
okay.
Yes, exactly.
And just so you know, even though the revitalization plan has not been officially signed into law yet, we already have a list of things that we want to keep our eye on, and some things that are like, maybe that needs to be checked on a bit. So it's what we do. It's the process that we're involved in. So rest assured, we're not done. We never will be done.
Okay.
Well, I just have one comment. I'd like to say, thanks for the work on this. I think that we've certainly suggested some flexibility for property owners and making some good accommodations. And so we visit this again, but let's go ahead and call for the question. On the motion. So we'll say all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Again, thank you guys for your efforts on this and for the public for coming in and talking to us about this. Talk to your friends, bring more people. We'd like to hear from the public. And I think that speaks to Commissioner Hostler's point where, hearing from the public is very important. And so I just want to say thank you for that. Okay, well, that was exciting. So we have new old business, and I'd like to draw your attention to a report submitted by Nate that discusses the housing policy number 1, the UGB policy benchmarks. Mr. Brown.
Okay. Well, if you'll recall, your recommendation to the council was on our housing policies strategy that we would basically recommend the committee's recommendation to you as to utilize the existing urban growth boundary for our housing stock supply. And after a lengthy discussion, there were concerns that were raised of we don't want to give the impression, just like we were talking earlier, that we're done and we're going to close the book on this and that everybody lives happily ever after, because it's a dynamic world that we live in and there's things that need to be paid attention to. And so your assignment to us was to go back and to develop what we called at the time benchmarks. I would like to re-characterize that a little bit and call them milestones, because there are some things that are not things that we particularly have control of. For example, the first one is adopt a population projection which is specific to Keizer. That is something that the state is already in process to. They're scheduled to do that at the end of next year. And they're going to go through that whole process again, and we're going to be assigned a number. It is an iterative process in that we will have the opportunity to have discussion as they have their consideration for developing that number. And we think that we should participate in that number to make sure that we know where we want to go in our population projection. So that right off the bat is something that is happening, that we don't decide whether it's going to or not, it is happening. Number 2, we need to assess the regional growth needs. The city of Salem is in their process right now to completely redo their comp plan and to map out what they think their projection is going to be and what they think their growth need is going to be after they get their number as well, because when we get our specific number, they're going to get their specific number. So that is also a dynamic process that it's not ours. That is not our decision to make. That is the city of Salem's decision to make. They are in the process of doing that now, and we need to pay attention to that, because even though there is room in that UGB now, there is not going to be room forever. Number 3, analyze the feasibility of growth considering our transportation impacts. We have just begun the process of selecting a consultant to do our impacts of growth on our transportation system. That process is going to take place the first part of this coming year. We anticipate a contract to be in place by January, and that is going to take probably 6 months. That will give us, the intent of that whole study is to say that there are 3 different scenarios that we could see as to what is the existing versus we have existing capacity in our share of the UGB and the rest goes to Salem. We have let's get a divorce and let's give all the land supply that we need, which only leaves basically 0.9 of one, and with maybe a little augment of filling little pieces here or there, whatever. anyway, the outcome of that is going to be pretty straightforward. If we get a divorce, this is what our land supply needs are going to be. And then the third one is, what are our opportunities to densify in addition to what we're doing, and then send some to the other parts of the urban growth boundary outside of Keizer's portion of it. Those are basically going to be our three different scenarios that transportation study is going to look at. Hopefully on Monday, I'm looking at our city councilor, we will adopt the revitalization plan. And that plan has some very specific efficiency measures that have been included in it. We are, as we've been talking about tonight, there's up to 2 ADUs per lot, which are allowed. There are also more opportunities to do townhome development, smaller lot sizes, et cetera. Those efficiency measures will have to be monitored. We're not sure what the market is going to do in the near term, in the long term. Those things are going to have to be paid attention to, and we're going to have to keep our eye on those. So that should be part of our calculation as to what we are doing in this UGB discussion. There's also going to be additional impacts from the state, from the adoption of House Bill 2001. There's going to be additional duplexes. There's going to be additional density that is simply mandated by our statutory requirements. That should also be analyzed as to what is the impacts going to be into the city of Keizer, to our existing as well as to our future growth. Number 6, we already have transportation needs that are identified in our transportation system plan. There are just to accommodate our existing growth within our existing share of the UGB, there are specific transportation facilities that need to be constructed. I think one of the measures of, as we expand the urban growth boundary, how have we benchmarked ourselves as to how we're taking care of our existing development needs? And so I think one of our score sheets should be, how successful have we been in constructing those existing transportation needs that we've already identified? And coupled with that, as we've identified in the revitalization plan, there are also other things besides infrastructure needs. There's also the sense of community that we have for things like additional community amenities such as plazas that are identified in that revitalization plan. There's also bike facilities that connecting north to south Keizer. That's also called for in the plan. So the plan lays out specific things that we as a city are committed to doing. I think that should also be part of our evaluation before we expand the urban growth boundary. Then I think we need to also pay attention to the needs of our existing community that we've already identified. The Keizer Compass identifies additional employment lands. The revitalization plan identifies specific community needs. Those things should also be part of our discussion as to how we're going to expand or not, or how we're going to address our future. So those are what I am proposing to you would be a good set of benchmarks for us to use in our future dialogue with the urban growth boundary discussion.
Commissioner Whalen.
Thank you. Nate, I'd like to thank you and your staff. I thought this was a good outline of things that we need to be aware of as milestones as we progress down the road, given, especially since the data is going to be coming at different times from different agencies. So we're going to have to do this like we always do with some flexibility, but I think it's a good matrix to begin to work from. So thank you.
there's one part of 6 that I think it speaks generally to me, at least, in a way of kind of how Keizer does things in general. And it says, without accomplishing the improvements specifically relates to the transportation system plan, any additional growth will compound the frustration with the growth needs of the transportation plan. Construction of these improvements will unlock the development potential in the northern section of Keizer and will provide additional potential for addressing needed housing in Keizer. And I think that's a really, I think as we've talked about this over and over, infrastructure has always been a major component. I know this is specifically as it relates to transportation, but I think, Commissioner Hostler brought it up as well when talking about, some of the other infrastructure needs and stuff like this. I really like this because this particular piece, I think, is encompassing of the whole discussion, not only with any UGB expansion, but also the River Road Revitalization Plan, and just the way that I think we have a tendency to do as a city. We don't sort of try to put the cart before the horse a lot of times. We try to think things out, and I think this was a very good summation of that. And for me, looking at these UGB milestones, and I like the term milestones great because that's the world I live in, I think these are clear objectives. I think they're attainable objectives. You haven't put anything out here, I think, that is out of reach, even within the next 10 years, looking at the efficiency measures impact. And so I just applaud you for the work done. And for me, I think you definitely answered the question that the commission tasked you with as it relates to these milestones. And I think it's a really good product. So I noticed in your report, you're asking the commission to consider the milestones, having a discussion, which doesn't sound like anybody's arguing with these, and make a recommendation to the council. Nothing? No divorce jokes?
Not this month.
Okay, all right. I'm shocked. So do you want a formal motion, or is it just kind of because I know we can't adopt the plan. Is it just kind of yep, we like it, send it to council? What are you looking for?
Well, my intent is, as we move forward to council with the housing policies, I would like this as part of your moving forward to the recommendation. I would at least like consensus from you, but honestly, if you were prepared to endorse it with a motion, I think that would be even stronger.
Commissioner Hostler.
There is one thing I would like to add, and that is a number of years ago, I was at the Saturday market in Salem, and probably some junior associates had this chop thing set up, and they were asking about, should we build a bike trail from Riverfront to Keizer? Now, I don't know how far that went, if it went out even further, but where I'm going with this is, when I read sense of place, when you're in a car, your sense of direction is different than when you're on a bike. And so that's something that I'm a big fan of, is expanding sense of place, because then people can have a connection to the community.
So my immediate response is, what I have tried to focus on here are adopted plans and adopted goals that have been established through thoroughly vetted in public process. And I didn't want to just throw things out there that I think we ought to have a SpaceX launch pad or whatever it might be. I don't know. I don't want to make light of it. But so I tried to focus on the goals and policies that Keizer has already identified. And I know the concept of that bike trail that has lived and sometimes died in various public processes. And I would want to make sure that we focus on what has been officially adopted and sanctioned by the city of Keizer as milestones in our process, in our future discussion. I mean, maybe that's going to live, and maybe that would be included in the future, but It has not at this point, and so I would be reluctant just to pull something out of the air that is a good idea, certainly, but has not been vetted.
So we've heard from Nate, a consensus is fine, but if the commission feels strongly that we want to endorse this milestone plan, we could do it via a formal motion. Is there a,
I think consensus is fine because this is somewhat of a moving target. And I think Commissioner Grenz is presenting Monday to the council. If you could just verbalize what this is.
Sure.
And because I think will this information be part of their packet, Nate? So they will have the information and we just move forward with it that way.
Oh, this won't be in their packet eventually it will be in their packet,
for the
but
ballot?
not for Monday.
Okay.
The packet is.
I'm not opposed to a motion, I just don't know that it's necessary.
Commissioner Kelly?
Yeah, and I kind of agree with Commissioner Whalen, but the other part is that this is the milestones provide us a context.
Right.
But when people see something has attached numbers to it, and you go to 1 to 2 to 3, they have this belief that, well, we'll accomplish 1, then we'll move to 2, then we'll move to 3. And there's none of that going to happen here. This is going to come from all different directions at different times, a lot of times when we're least expected or can deal with it. And so,
Well, I think 1 will be first,
yeah, but not all of it.
because it's already got a date.
Yeah, but again, but not all that information is going to be there. But so I like the consensus. I fully support it. But if I'm going to put something into a motion, I was trying to figure out how I would provide that motion with an explanation of what I have just said. And so I think the explanation Monday on the liaison report, and that they'll be seeing this, and that we're in support of this. And at some point, maybe they'll get it in a form of an actual motioned item, but at this point, it's too jellified yet.
Well, and it's an element of a plan that we couldn't actually adopt anyways.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm not seeing anybody saying no. Do you have what you need?
Okay.
Okay.
Not what he wanted, but he has what he
No,
needs.
it's fine, it's fine. That was a on-the-fly kind of comment anyway, but as long as I can report to council that it was unanimous consensus.
Yep.
By definition, that's what consensus is, so I'm fine.
I'll learn how to do that properly next time. All right, so we're still on new old business. Is there any additional new or old business we need to discuss this evening? Staff?
You heard it, the RFQ closed. We had 2 submissions. Kittleson and DKS have submitted their qualifications for consideration in this study. So now we are going to evaluate them and score them. And by December 1st, 2nd, we will have a score sheet back, and the goal is to reach a contract by the first of the year. That's all.
All right. Anything else from the dais? Okay,
Council license report?
well, I'm getting there.
Oh, sorry.
So,
I didn't want to miss your turn.
so we would like to welcome Councilor Smith as our special guest star, filling in for Councilor Freeman. Thank you for being here this evening.
Thank you so much. And I did get a little report card Kim gave me to tell you about. So things are going very swimmingly here. I'm impressed, actually. Thank you guys so much for all this work. It's kind of fun to see the the work that goes into it before it actually gets to our desk. And believe it or not, 90% of what you were talking about, I actually did understand because of what I do for a living. So that was fun. The density thing, you were losing me. But as far as the ADUs and mortgage lending, those tie in pretty well together in construction. So that was interesting. Thank you for the input on that. Tomorrow is the West Keizer Neighborhood Association meeting here. And Monday night is city council. It sounds like we're going to have another fun packed evening of data and information. And the only other thing she wanted me to bring up was that we did begin the charter review committee. We had our first meeting, and actually we're both on it. And interesting, it's a lot of work actually. I think we dumped a bunch of stuff on Shannon, but he's done a really good job of putting together kind of what each item is and what his recommendation is to kind of bring it in alignment with the Oregon League of Oregon Cities, right? That what they have kind of set forth, but I would highly recommend staying attentive to that. There's a lot of discussion that's going on there and a lot of work still to be done, but we'll do it in a systematic manner to make sure it's efficient. We're not going to just rush this. So that's about all I have.
All right. Thank you, Councilor Smith. So Council Representative for November 18th is Commissioner Grentz. Are you going to be able to make that?
Available.
Okay, sounds great. So with that being said, I'd just like to again thank staff and the public for being here this evening and providing great input on our public hearing. It was a good dialogue from the dais this evening. I think we had a lot of good questions and a good robust discussion, which is always good. And I would just like to say again, thank you. And if there's no, oh, by the ways, I'd like to call the November 13th, 2029 meeting of the Keizer Planning Commission adjourned at 7:37.